Enjoy. Welcome back to Deconstructive Criticism, Brendan O'Neill, editor-at-large for Spiked Online. Now, last time I interviewed you, I intentionally did not ask you about environmentalism, but now you've had the gall to criticize our child god, Greta Thunberg, and why would you do a thing like that?
Because everyone thinks I was attacking herself, young Greta, which, you know, would be a pretty mean thing to do because she's a 16-year-old and she looks even younger than 16, sounds younger. And in a sense, I was criticizing her style and her delivery and the fact that she does often look like a cult member and sound like a cult member, you know, standing up on stage and intoning to the world about how we're all going to die in some hell fire and be punished for our eco sins. So I think people who do that deserve criticism or should expect criticism. But the main people I'm worried about are the people who are exploiting her, the people who are using her to front their miserablest eco-friendly campaigns, who are very cynically pushing her as the kind of messiah of environmentalism, the kind of the god child off the eco view of life. And I think the people doing that are being incredibly censorious because the aim is to prevent any criticism whatsoever of their political agenda.
How?
When people use children as moral shields, it's always about deflecting criticism. Because if you've got a child at the front of your political campaign or your moral campaign or your campaign for censorship or whatever it is, your aim is to say this campaign is beyond reproach, because if you criticize it, you're criticizing the children. And that's exactly what's happened. You know, the response to the article I wrote on Greta has been absolutely bananas. It's this crazy Twitter storm. There were numerous articles in the press about this. People have been slagging me off on radio and TV. Now, I can live with all that, that's fine, but it kind of proves the point I was making, which is that she has been elevated into this messianic figure, the kind of prophet of doom who has seen the future and the hellfire that is going to consume the earth, and she's come back in time to tell us all about it. That's really how she is treated. And I think Greens and politicians and the European Union and various other powerful institutions who have no solutions whatsoever to the economic crisis are cynically using her to push this kind of backward, anti-progressive, anti-human agenda. I think that's bad for her because she is an autistic and incredibly fearful girl, and they're using her fear for political ends, and that will make her thought processes even more damaged. And it's bad for politics because it's designed precisely to end political debate by saying this girl is speaking the truth and you may not contradict her. So it's bad for everyone and everything.
Yeah, the fact that she looks younger than her 16 years has to do with her Asperger's, actually, because part of her diagnosis is she has a diagnosis of self-harm.
Yes, well, this is one of the problems. You know, she is, according to her family's own account, she's a self-harmer, right? This is, I would argue, and I know I'm not very good at politically correct language, I do try sometimes, I would argue that she's a mentally fragile young person. She's a mentally unstable young person. That is what her own family's account suggests. That is what her own account suggests. She is, she has a mental condition, Asperger's syndrome. She is incredibly scared. This is a young girl who has stood up in front of the European Parliament and cried because she thinks the future, she hasn't got a future. She talks about the house being on fire. She means the planet being on fire. She says people of her generation might not live very long. She is consumed by fear. And that raises so many questions for me. Firstly, it makes me think, what the hell are they teaching children at schools these days? It's like fire and brimstone stuff. It's even worse than what we got. I went to a Catholic school, and, you know, Catholics really do believe that the end of the world will come and we will be judged for our sins. But even we didn't get taught anything as hysterical as that. So I'm really worried about what's being taught to kids in Europe in schools about climate change. It seems to me that they're being taught a very fearful, anti-human, misanthropic view of the future as this incredibly doom-laden sphere, and we're all going to die. So that's the first question. And the second question it raises for me is, why on earth are adults, supposedly responsible political adults, looking at this girl and seeing an opportunity rather than seeing a young person who needs probably a bit of help and a bit of comfort and to have a normal life so that she can get over this panic and fear that she has. But instead of treating her like a young person who needs guidance and assistance, they've seen her as an opportunity. They've seen her as someone they can exploit.
For what?
To re-energize the environmentalist argument, which had been slipping off the agenda. Over the past 2 or 3 years, the whole climate change panic had slipped off the agenda because we've had the populist revolt, we had the Trump phenomenon, we had Brexit, we've had various revolts across Europe where people are voting for parties they're not supposed to vote for. And all of this has led to, I would argue, the re-energizing of politics to a certain extent, where questions of democracy and power and sovereignty and all these things have come back into play. As a consequence of that, all the stuff that we had been told to panic about for years, like climate change, slipped off the agenda. And the kind of upper middle classes who are obsessed with climate change and obsessed with the idea that the planet is disgusting and industry is disgusting and people are too fat and people are driving too much, that section of society was so aggrieved at the fact that climate change had been shunted down the list of concerns. And so they're coming back now with a vengeance. That's why we also have this movement called Extinction Rebellion, which is a bunch of very bourgeois, people from well-off backgrounds who are going through the streets and saying people have got to stop flying and stop driving to the supermarket and stop having a nice life and instead just live in a cold, small house and never eat meat.
Yeah, that's what Greta is saying.
That's what Greta is saying.
That's her argument. She begins every speech by saying, I want you to panic.
Yes.
I want you to feel the same panic that I feel every day. In which, of course, she's absolutely right.